Hello and welcome to episode 357 of Stand Up. I am Pete Dominic. Very happy to have you joining me today on the podcast. I've got two excellent guests. Michael Mechanic is a senior editor at Mother Jones Magazine, but we're talking about his first and new book today, How the Super Rich Really Live and How Their Wealth Harms Us All. That's coming up. Before that, I've got the great Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor, legal analyst on NBC News, podcaster, YouTuber, who has just become absolutely massive, and very excited to have you hear our conversation because I asked him a whole bunch of questions about the current ongoing issues regarding the Trump campaign, everything regarding Matt Gaetz and Joel Greenberg, and most importantly, what is happening with folks who are incarcerated today and how we can change the criminal justice system to make it better, more fair, more equitable, and in radical ways. So great conversation with both of my guests. No news segment today because it is the Friday show, and on the Friday show, it is the day after the Thursday show, where Thursday nights I hang out with subscribers, some listeners of the program, and had an awesome hangout. Like over 2 hours last night with almost 50 of you, and it was so great to see you. We ended in a really fun and poignant way where everybody said, a whole bunch of people said really nice parting words to each other and about their lives, and it was just fantastic and feels great, and I can't do this without you. So thank you to everybody who joined me last night, especially Sheila Bray. Shout out for Sheila because I woke up to such a wonderful email from Sheila, and I wanted to share it with everybody right now. Well, first, she shared a wonderful picture, a little shot of vitamin N from Bryce Canyon, Utah from a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely wonderful, and I will include that on today's email for listeners, subscribers. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic to subscribe. But Sheila wrote, while I've got you, I just want to say thank you. Stand Up is hands down my favorite podcast, my first podcast listen each day. You know, months ago, Pete, when you said your goal was to build a community, I thought, well, that's nice. I had no expectation or idea what that would create. The daily podcast, the Discord chat, the weekly Zoom hangs have really brought this group together like no other. Having this podcast through this past year has been such a great escape. As a mom of two small kids, preschool and second grade, virtual learning, working from home, and finishing grad school, my motto became one day at a time. As crazy as it may seem, the daily podcast became something stable I could depend on as my escape time every day. I continue to learn, be challenged, and laugh each and every day by this community, the guests, and by you. Stand Up is truly in a league all of its own. I can't thank you enough for all you've done and you continue to do to share your amazing craft with us. Sheila, thank you. Oh my gosh, that is so awesome to wake up to. I'm so appreciative of that, and I hope you don't mind me sharing it with you because I feel the same way about everybody that is listening and supporting this show, and that was just so great. So thank you very much, Sheila. Email me, by the way, anytime about anything, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Tweet me at Pete Dominic. I do want to mention normally on Fridays we have Christian Finnegan, but Christian had open heart surgery on Wednesday, and I can report to you now he is out of surgery. He is doing okay. I haven't heard directly from him, but he did tweet about it, and so we are wishing him the best. And that's why he is not here today. But I do have two excellent guests joining me. So let's get it started right now with a former federal prosecutor of 30 years of trial experience, served in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia for 24 years, rising to the position of chief of the Homicide Section. In that capacity, he supervised 30 homicide prosecutors and oversaw all homicide grand jury investigations and prosecutions in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he served more than 6 years in active duty as an Army JAG prosecutor, trying court-martial cases, handling criminal appeals, and including espionage and death penalty cases. Glenn Kirschner tried hundreds of cases in his 30 years as a prosecutor, including more than 50 murder trials, multiple lengthy RICO trials, and precedent-setting cases. He has now got a amazing YouTube channel and podcast, and definitely subscribe to both those. The audio quality on this is very good for the most part. There's a little bit of static because he wasn't on Wi-Fi and he was using his headphones, but I think it's pretty good. I'll give it an 8 even with the static, because also it's tolerable because Glenn is always so good on air. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's do this right now. Glenn Kirschner, the Kirschner Report. There he is, superstar, media, legal analyst, and expert. Almost no one, look, 500,000 Twitter followers now, Glenn Kirschner, killing it everywhere. Thank you for joining me. How are you? You're everywhere.
I'm good, Pete. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm happy to be here with you asking some questions because there's a ton to talk about with you. And before we get into kind of the relevant current events, I wanted to ask you a question just about incarceration. You prosecuted the worst of the worst. And I wonder what you think about incarceration in general. Obviously, you have to take people out of the general community if they're hurting people, if they're, going to hurt more people. But, certain other countries do it in a lot more humane way. And I just feel like this country is so addicted to punishment and punitive measures. And I feel like that's wrong. I want to ask you, because you prosecuted these bad people.
Yeah, I tell you, we could do an hour on this because this is an area that I'm actually involved in right now. I don't like to use the word decarceration. It sounds a little cheap and easy, but I think we need to do much better in at least two ways. Let's go with three ways. One, instead of taking everybody who is a chronic offender up front, relatively minor crimes that are obviously a product of mental health challenges, addiction challenges, poverty challenges, homelessness challenges, and running them through the incarceration system, spitting them out on the other end, worse off than when they came in on the front end. So what are you doing? You're setting them up for failure. They're going to go out and they're going to reoffend. Now you've got another victim. Now they're on the front end. You're going to do it all over again. And what it is, Pete, it is a permanent downhill slide for everybody, for the offender and his or her family, for the community because he's going out and victimizing others, for the taxpayer because we have to spend more to put people through this process over and over again. So we need to do a better job up front on diversion programs, doing something other than running them mindlessly through the prison system. Then we need to do a better job on the back end, reentry. And I'm involved in a number of reentry programs. Some of them are really killer reentry programs. They're looking at, for example, court supervision for parolees and probationers in a whole new way. And I would love to do an hour on that with you because it's really pretty exciting. And then the third piece, even though I was going to try to limit it to two, is trying to work to rehabilitate people while they're in prison, because we're basically putting them in conditions that will guarantee they're becoming more hardened. They're going to suffer PTSD because every day is a struggle to survive inside the prison. And then they come out and they reoffend. So Three big pieces. But let me say, Pete, I prosecuted murderers for 22 of my 30 plus years as a prosecutor. And murderers, unfortunately, I view differently, not as human beings, but as a societal issue. You can't let folk kill citizens. So these are people, when you choose to take another human life for no good reason with no defense, I'm sorry, but public safety becomes the paramount concern. And we're going to need to have you sit in prison for a minute, long term, actually. And let me just say, yesterday, there was a joint op-ed that Congressman Swalwell and I did together. It's up on Newsweek. It went up yesterday, and it's on some bipartisan legislation that I have been working on for a very long time. I'd like to think of it as my baby, and it's called the Homicide Victims Families Rights Act, and it was just introduced into Congress, and it's a beautiful thing because we have more than 250,000 families in this country who have suffered a loss to violent crime, the loss of a loved one, and their loved one's case has never been solved. It's open. And most of these cases, Pete, are going uninvestigated, sitting in police department file cabinets gathering dust, in large part due to a lack of resources. So again, I could do 6 hours on this new bipartisan legislation that I'm very excited about because it's going to get help to those more than 250,000 families to jumpstart the murder investigation of their loved one.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'd love to talk to you and Swalwell about that at some point, and talk to you as long as you want about these other deeper issues. I'm glad I asked about it. And I was thinking, because to pivot to this issue that you've written an op-ed at msnbc.com, really good, about this guy Joel Greenberg and his involvement with Matt Gaetz, and you write that because sounds like he's a pretty bad guy. You write in this piece, the breadth and depth and depravity of Greenberg's crimes are staggering. Looking just at the crimes which he's admitted, he's been involved in sex trafficking of a child, producing a false identification document while serving as a public official, a disturbing abuse of office and of the public trust, aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, stalking a political opponent, and conspiracy to commit a crime against the United States. As a prosecutor, you write, I sponsored the testimony of thieves, burglars, drug dealers, gun runners, and hitmen, but I'm not sure I ever had a cooperating witness which as despicable as criminal resume as Greenberg's. That is something to say about this guy, but, well, we can talk about kind of the punitive measures, that we just talked about for him or somebody else another time. But let's get to this case because everybody is guessing that the bigger fish here is Matt Gaetz. But Matt Gaetz hasn't been indicted, and I just feel like that's wishful thinking because there's a little smoke there. What do you think about this?
Well, it's wishful thinking until you read the 60 pages of the 86-page plea and cooperation agreement that Joel Greenberg entered into. 60 pages of receipts, hard corroboration of the crimes Joel Greenberg committed together with others. Now, that many of them together with others. And it spells out that, for example, he was sex trafficking in a minor, and he was giving this minor to other men, plural, who then engaged in sexual commercial conduct with this child. So they've got the receipts. The prosecutors have the evidence to prove it. And that's the only reason they're going to do business with a Joel Greenberg is because they can prove every flippin' word he says. Otherwise, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. So these other men are going to fall. They are going to be indicted. It sure seems like and feels like Matt Gaetz is one of them, right? It only makes sense given all of the facts contained in that 60-page factual proffer. But again, we don't know. You're right, Pete. We don't know.
You're right.
Know.
You write in the article, Gaetz has not been charged with a crime and was not mentioned in the plea agreement. Could it simply be, not simply, but that Greenberg gave these women to a whole bunch of horrible guys? There's a whole bunch of guys that Greenberg is going to flip on. So instead of the bigger fish, it's a whole bunch of other guys, a whole bunch of guys that are predators that they're going to be able to take down because Greenberg, and maybe Gaetz is one of them, but maybe he's not.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure. But here's the thing. When I observe that no other men or no other co-conspirators were named in the plea agreement, that's business as usual, Pete. When we enter into plea and cooperation agreements, we never name in those documents who we are about to arrest, who we are about to indict. Why? Because then they're going to flee. They're going to destroy evidence. They're going to tamper with witnesses. So, but I'll tell you, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet a buck of my own money that Gaetz is one of the people who will soon be locked up.
And that's a lot because you still use, you told me, coupons to buy cat food and don't even have a cat. So that means something.
Yes, I am living in the Depression era in my mind. Yes.
What is the most, do you have an expensive suit?
There was a really nice one I got from Sears. It's kind of a polyester blend. I don't buy expensive clothes or shoes or cars, Pete. None of it. I live in a tiny little townhome. Opulence is not my thing.
So you don't have anything nice? Any name brand, anything?
I've got a nice wife. I don't. I hope Nilu is listening. If not, I'll send her this link. My wife, Nilu. No, I don't. Do I have anything nice?
No expensive habits or interests or anything like that. You don't.
I love a good cigar. I don't tend to spend a lot of money on cigars, but I love a good cigar.
Can you tell me the most expensive cigar you've ever purchased for yourself? Or you probably would buy a case.
Probably an Arturo Fuente Opus X, which is probably a $30 stick, which I tend to trend to the $5, $6, $8 cigars, but like a nice Opus X or a nice Padron. I mean, there's some really nice cigars out there.
I have been enjoying cigars for the last couple of years. I always go on and off with them, but how often do you smoke one is my question. I like once a week I was doing. I thought that was a lot. Is that a lot?
When the weather is nice, I'll do maybe one a week. Yeah, and then I'll go all winter, and I won't even bother because I need to be outside.
Right, me too. Same. It's a seasonal thing for me too. But I would like to smoke a cigar with you at some point.
I would love that, brother.
Okay, so moving on, the big story. I don't know why I asked Greenberg about that one first. Doesn't matter. The big story this week, though, is, and you're all over this one, of course, is the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, Tish, everybody calls her, announced a criminal investigation of the Trump Organization. And so there's a lot of questions there, but it looks like everybody's speculating that the guy who basically ran it for Trump, who never asked questions, called him Mr. Trump, revered him, Alan Weisselberg, looks like he may have flipped. That's what Michael Cohen's saying. There's just a whole bunch of speculation. But why is it important? What is the significance of the AG, Tish James, announcing a criminal investigation in the Trump Organization?
Yeah, this was a really unusual announcement for a prosecutor or an attorney general to make, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But there are two questions. What do we know based on this announcement, and what can we reasonably infer based on this announcement? What we know is that this is bad for Trump and the Trump Organization. And, of course, the organization is like 5 people. It's his family members and Alan Weisselberg, right? Yeah. So it's bad because anytime you go from the target of a civil investigation, civil investigations are only about money. They're about fines, penalties, restitution, and maybe at most you can be prohibited from running a business in the future, a la Tish James taking down the Trump charity and going after the NRA. But civil investigations are only about money. Criminal investigations are about prison. So what we know is it's always a bad thing to go from the target in a civil matter to the target in a criminal matter. That's bad. And so, but the other thing is, when you're going after an organization, it's not always easy to get jail time for the members of the organization. Going after organizations and businesses and corporations criminally is a real challenge. So I thought, okay, it's a nice announcement. It's also nice to have the Attorney General's office and her staff and the expertise and the experience that they bring to an investigation now partnering up with Cy Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney's staff, and the expertise and the experience they bring, because 2 prosecutorial heads are better than 1. So that's also a bad thing for Trump and company. But I also wasn't all that impressed with the substance of it. It's like we have been hearing from, every prosecutor in town. I'm investigating Donald Trump, right? The state attorney general in New York, the Manhattan District Attorney, the Department of Justice is inevitably investigating Trump for any number of crimes. Bob Mueller investigated Trump. The Georgia prosecutors are investigating Trump. Pete, Donald Trump is the most investigated and the least prosecuted man on the face of the earth. Yeah. Because nobody is prosecuting this mope for all of the crimes that he's committed in the harsh light of day. Somebody has got to man up or woman up and drop an indictment on his head, because there is ample evidence to do it. I think everybody's involved in a little game of chicken. Who's going to be the first one out of the chute to indict Donald Trump? I do predict once the first indictment drops, there's going to be a whole lot of me too. Me too. I'm going to drop an indictment. I'm going to drop an indictment, because now they're not the first one to indict a former sitting president. So, do
you hear anything? Do you hear anything from your friends, DOJ or anywhere else, that would inform you on that? Because that's quite a theory. It's very interesting that there's enough evidence in all these different cases, but nobody wants to go first. I haven't heard that anywhere. And do you hear anything that informs that, or is it just not
as far as you know? But here's what I'll say. But here's what I'll say. What I know, Pete, I know federal prosecutors. Yeah. I was one for 30 years. I know what the inside of the Department of Justice looks like. Many prosecutors are a little bit too timid in my estimation. Nobody wants to lose. One thing, I urge people to read a book called The Chicken Shit Club by Dang, and I was actually messaging with the author.
I'll look it up. Go ahead. Tell me about it.
Yeah, please. So it's all about the occasional timidity of the Department of Justice. We have all heard about how if the feds bring a case, they're going to win that case. The feds don't lose cases. Well, I am not the biggest fan of James Comey, but the quote for the title of that book, The Chicken Shit Club,
Jesse Eisinger.
came from Jesse Eisinger. I recommend the read. It's a good look inside. Inside the Department of Justice and its decision-making process. So when Jim Comey was the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, he would talk to his prosecutors and say, listen, don't be one of those guys or gals who runs around bragging that you've never lost a case, because what that means is you've never brought a difficult, challenging case. Don't be a member of the chicken shit club. And that always stuck with me, because I always hated the notion that we would only bring cases that are absolute lay down winners, because that does a disservice to victims and to the community. If you have enough evidence to charge the case, and our standard to prosecute a case is a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits, then you bring that case and you try to do justice. If you lose, you lose. There's no shame in losing. The shame is in not bringing the case. And right now, there's a little bit of shame to be spread around, because these cases against Donald Trump must be brought.
You've had this interesting tone in your videos as of late, where you basically have in no way given up that there will be indictments, that there will be cases, and even criminal cases. And you beg us, the listener, the viewer, to be patient. But you also say, I get it. I'm frustrated. And I think we now know a little bit of why you're frustrated, just explaining this legal process. But should the country, Jonathan Chait at New York Magazine just had an interesting, the title of the article is Why Prosecutors Need to Prepare the Country for Donald Trump's Trial. And I just feel like a lot of people are writing these kind of articles, and they must be hearing things, and you must be hearing things. And does the country need to be prepared for a former president to be indicted?
The country should be prepared, because the former president will be indicted, probably in multiple jurisdictions. But here's the thing, Pete. Donald Trump is a federal problem, and we need a federal solution. New York can bring charges. That's wonderful, because he violated the laws of New York. Georgia can bring charges. That's wonderful, because he violated the state election laws of Georgia, of course, in a pretty consequential way, because it had to do with a national election. But Donald Trump is a federal problem, and we need a federal solution. That means a federal indictment, so that we can begin to hold him accountable for, we could spend another hour on the crimes that he has committed.
And is that something that you think Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco are prepared to do?
Absolutely. I think they've been working their whole lives as public servants for this moment. Merrick Garland is a quiet storm. Cut his domestic terrorism teeth on the Oklahoma City bombing case, supervised the Unabomber case, supervised the Atlanta Olympics bombing case, prosecuted Marion Barry in a very high-profile, difficult public corruption trial in my old office, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. Lisa Monaco was a prosecutor in my office. She is strong and solid and honest and fearless. Together, they're both kind of a quiet storm, but the storm is coming. It's coming.
I hope you're right about that. All right. Lastly, I just want to ask you about this 1-6 commission, which is it actually is bipartisan. I don't think Congress should have anything to do with this. And you look at the 9/11 commission, I'm pretty sure that was a whole bunch of people from outside of government, former government. In fact, I forget but if there were, but in this case, Congress itself were the victims of a crime. It seems very strange. And I don't know, maybe you can offer a legal parallel to have the victims also be the investigators, and obviously all the politics here. So I don't like that at all. Nonetheless, 35 Republicans voted for its creation and are on the panel. But what do you think about my argument there about who should be on it, who should be conducting this investigation, the investigation itself, and what it means, the consequences of it?
So if we were applying legal principles, they would obviously be conflicted out because they are the victims. But this is not a legal arena. This is a political arena. And what they need to do is legislate. in every flippin' way they can to guard against a recurrence of this situation. So I have no problem with a congressional commission looking into the attack on the Capitol, the insurrection. What I do have a problem with is Kevin McCarthy trying to shut it down, because Kevin McCarthy is deeply involved, at a minimum, with information that Donald Trump provided to him in that real-time conversation on the 6th while the Capitol was being attacked, when Donald Trump said, well, Kevin, I guess my supporters down there, and I'm paraphrasing, attacking the Capitol are more upset with the election results than you are. And he refused to intervene and stop an attack that Donald Trump, had launched. Pete, that is sharply incriminating information, and Kevin McCarthy doesn't want to testify about it before Congress. What I would call this, we used to investigate drug cases in open air drug markets, like where just drugs were being sold openly and notoriously. We called them, and we weren't unique, open air drug markets. What Kevin McCarthy is doing is an open air cover up.
Wow. Yeah, that's all really good points. I will let you go, but I did see that you tweeted, and so now publicly said that your oldest daughter, Kate, is going to give birth in July, and you will finally earn the title of grandpa. You wrote, impossible to describe how much I'm looking forward to that. Try.
So I'm having dinner with her tonight, and it's funny because she and her husband, Shimon, just a wonderful guy.
You like this person?
I love him. Okay. They just moved from San Francisco. They've lived in Colorado and San Francisco for the last decade. They're finally back on the East Coast. They're in Chevy Chase right up the street. And so they've been here 3 days, and I think I've already been there 2 of the 3 days, and I'm seeing her again tonight. And I said, look, Kate, her name is Kate. I said, I realize we're going to have to set some boundaries. So I intend to only come visit you guys 5 times a week. Does that work? Because, my kids, that's my posse. That's my team. Those are my people. And, I don't say this because I want to sound like a good dad. I don't play golf. I didn't do stuff on the weekends. What I did was I hung out with my team.
Same.
On the weekends, and when they were growing up, and I cried like a baby each time I dropped off another kid, each one of my 5 daughters at college. My first one, Kate, went to Northwestern University. I got in the car after dropping her off. It's a 12-hour drive back. I swear I cried for the first 6 hours. That's how desperately.
I told you before we record, my daughter's, in 10th grade, and we're just starting to have the conversation, but I'm going to call you when I drop her off and just cry. And so you can counsel me, but that's very exciting. That's very exciting. Yeah. I'm very excited for you. Do you care about the gender? Are you hoping for anything?
Going to be a girl. We already know.
Oh, of course. Okay.
But they're holding the name close to the vest. We don't know yet. So I'm trying to pry that out of her.
Are you lobbying for any names?
No.
No, those would be the boundaries that you definitely don't want to cross right away. Thank you so much for joining me. Congratulations on that. I'm very excited for you. And I hope that you get away soon and take a vacation.
Thanks, Pete. Great talking to you.
Later. Glenn Kirschner, new grandpa. Please let him know you heard him here on the program by tweeting him at Glenn Kirschner 2. Subscribe to his podcast, his YouTube channel, and always great talking with Glenn. And I'm very excited for him to be a granddad. Okay, now I've got to move on to my second guest here on the Friday show, episode 357. First time I'd ever talked to him, but I absolutely loved his very important book. Have you ever fantasized about being ridiculously wealthy? Probably. Striking it Rich is among the most resilient of American fantasies, surviving war and peace, expansions and recessions, economic meltdowns, and global pandemics. We dream of the jackpot, the big exit, the life-altering payday, and whatever form that takes. We would escape, quote, essential day jobs and cramped living spaces, bury our debts, buy that sweet spread, and bail out struggled friends and relations. But rarely do we follow this fantasy to its conclusion, to ponder the social, psychological, and societal downsides of great affluence and the fact so few possess it. Well, guess what? This book asks so many great questions and is so well researched. It's called Jackpot, How the Super Rich Really Live and How Their Wealth Harms Us All. My guest, Michael Mechanic, is also a senior editor at Mother Jones. He's on Twitter at Michael Mechanic, and you absolutely check out his website, michaelmechanic.com. You got to get this book. It's such a great read, and I'm very happy to have him joining me for the first time for an almost hour-long conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you the author of Jackpot, Michael Mechanic, right now.
I heard you on NPR, and I was like, who is that guy? Where is that guy? I have to talk to that guy. Such an important book, and an original book, because this is a very difficult book to do research for and write as a journalist, an investigative journalist, if you will. Why? Why has this never been done?
Because rich people don't like to talk to anybody. They hide. It's actually, talking about your personal finances are taboo in this country. It's considered, you're more likely to talk about your sex life, probably openly, than you are to talk about your wealth. And especially, for people who have a lot of money, there's a lot of sensitivity to it, because especially in this day and age with the yawning inequality and wealth gap, there's a concern that, of how you're going to be perceived. And maybe there's some guilt, maybe not. But I think there's just a general unease. Like, people don't want to be, they're worried they're going to be taken advantage of. They're worried about people knowing about their wealth and maybe targeting them. They're worried how, if somebody approaches them as a friend, is that a real gesture, or does somebody want something from them? These are some of the woes of having money and having other people know about it.
Yeah, and just up front, so regular listeners probably would know, but just so you know, like, I despise this kind of wealth, and I want to eat the rich, and I think billionaires should not be allowed to exist, and I say tax them all, just all that. Before I just want to say that we'll talk about, solutions, and I'll get your take on all of this, but I do want to delve into their lives, because you do a great job of educating us. So I want to have some fun here with you at the top and talk about what their lives are like, but I just want to make, just so you knew my kind of moral judgment on that. But the other thing,
I have a question for you then, because you want to eat the rich, but do you want to be the rich?
No.
Because a lot of people, in fact, there's a little scene in my book with Chuck Collins, who wrote his own book about, calls it Wealth Hoarders. He goes around educating people about inequality, and he's talking to an audience of a few hundred people, as he often does. And he says, how many of you out there hate the 1%? And everybody raises their hand. And then he says, how many of you out there want to be the 1%? And they all raise their hand.
Yeah.
So there's this disconnect. It's like a lot of people want these things, or they think they want them, and yet they resent the people who are there. So, you want to join the club that you resent? It's that strange disconnect.
No, I think it's a really great question that everybody should have to answer. And I have a lot of answers for how I feel about it, but I think I can put my money where my mouth is on the idea, which was, as I worked my way up through my 20s and 30s in my different industries that I was in, from comedy to media, I knew kind of what the amount of money I would need to make to feel really comfortable would be. I got there, and I kind of shut down my revenue streams. I said, I'm there, and now I want this balance. I want to be as much as I can. I always thought that to be wealthy would be to have more time with my children. And so I constructed my life that way. And now I'm kind of, I lost that corporate gig, but now I've recreated a lot of it, and monetized this podcast. And now I have the things I didn't have then, which is working from home and being with my kids more. So I think that it's a good question to just ask, what is enough for you? If you could guarantee this amount of money for the rest of your life, what would that figure be? What more would you need?
Well, it's interesting you're saying that, because you're remarkable in that sense.
My wife didn't agree with that necessarily, and I'm not throwing her under a bus. I think because she was always worried about like putting money away and having, but I'm talking about, work-life balance and getting there, and then not driving myself crazy. Sorry to jump in.
No. I hear you. It's just, I'm talking about people's psychology, about security. Like, how much money would it take for me to feel financially secure, so I think I can just sort of relax and not worry about things and do what I want, right? And that's sort of the whole thing. We think wealth is liberty, but you talk to people who get to a certain point, and that's their number, that the big N, right? What's your number? Where you're going to reach that number and you're fine, you're good. And every time you get to that number, the number moves away from you because you've upped your lifestyle. You're spending more money. All of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, I've got all these expenses. One guy in my book, James Everingham, he kind of hit the jackpot as a Netscape coder when he was in his 20s. Came from lower middle class, and all of a sudden he's worth, today's equivalent of like $8 or $9 million. And he came in 3 months before the IPO. I mean, this is like boom. Some of the guys who had been around longer got a lot more, but it was a really anxious and uncomfortable experience for him to come into all this money. So all of a sudden, people are, he said, it was like I put in the book. It's like the old blues songs. When you have the money, everybody comes around. They want to be your friend. Sure. The girls all of a sudden took interest in him they never had before. And he's like, all of a sudden, I was so much better looking the day after the IPO than it was the day before.
Yeah, I mean, I understand all that human psychology. I don't even judge it, but I guess my moral question about it is, if there are 7 billion human beings, how do you share that? How do you share the resources of the world? And I think another interesting question is, what do you deserve based on whoever you are? And those are questions that we can all talk about for years, I suppose, and debate about. But I think those are the questions. There's 7 billion of us. How do you how are people over here not having running water and shitting in a stream, and people over here have several homes, and own a stream, and then sell the stream to Poland Spring? I mean, like, it's...
Yeah, I mean, well, right. I mean, it's like even poor people in America can go to some other countries and feel rich, because it's like, for sure, you're not actually living on a landfill, picking your food out of the garbage dump like, some people in India are. But so, you compare yourself to the people around you. That's why you get rich people saying, oh, I'm middle class, because they're living in such a wealthy neighborhood and the housing has cost so much. They feel like I'm just like everybody else, but that everybody else is actually really quite wealthy.
And some people probably never leave whatever lane. I mean, most people probably that they're in, maybe to visit, but generally you stay in the lane, the income bracket that you were born into. There are tons of exceptions, obviously, but generally, I mean, we can talk about data now. And so you don't really get that perspective of what it's like, except to sometimes visit it, which is why we can talk about how we should have certain requisites and experiences to gain perspective about how other folks do live. But is it pretty fair to say that people stay within the range that they're born into?
Probably, yeah. I mean, in fact, if you look at economic mobility in this country, those rags to riches stories, they're very rare. Yeah. We fetishize them,
Yeah.
We hear about them all the time because, it's like everyone wants to hear that fun story about the guy who had nothing and all of a sudden he's a billionaire. And how did he do it? And the fact is, you can call him self-made, but that's BS. He got lucky. He had good timing. He probably had a support network somewhere along the line. He hired people that helped him. You don't just get there, by hard work and keeping your nose to the grindstone and being smart. It takes more than that, it takes, and plus, we all benefit from the collective whole, the things that taxes fund. As people say, I'm self-made, and I'm like, oh yeah, did you build the roads that your goods are trucked on? Did you create the internet? No, like government research created the internet initially. So,
no, I mean, it's the dumbest thing in the world. I'm self-made. Yeah. I made this app and I sold it 10 years later for $1 billion. Like, well, what school did you go to? Your parents, it's all, talking about comprehensive, holistic look at your life, and where you were born is how you were made, literally the zip code, not only the country. But how did you write this book, Michael? Like, how did you talk to people? You have characters or sources. I'm not sure which one is better word to use to reference these folks, but who did you talk to? What kind of time did you spend with them? I mean, you must have lived amongst the super wealthy to some extent, just to get a taste of what they're living like, so you could write about it and share it with the rest of us.
Well, it's not, these guys, they don't invite you to live with, don't come to my yacht, fly on my plane. No, you don't get much of that. They say, hell, you're a journalist from Mother Jones, stay away,
Right.
Or
right.
Some of them you interview a few times, some of them you interview once, because they're super busy. Most of these people, I mean, people who run companies and funds and stuff, they have busy lives. One guy said to me, being rich is better than being poor, but it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more moving parts, and you're constantly having people asking you questions. You have to make decisions. You have things that are demanded of you. And as I point out in the book, even doing fun things can be kind of a big time suck, because there's a lot of things to be organized and thought about. If you want to have that fantasy life and have 7 houses and 2 yachts and an airplane, I mean, household employees, I mean, all these things have to be managed. And that's it's a full-time job. Even to give away money is a full-time job if you're talking about a lot of money. I mean, look at Mackenzie Scott, who's Jeff Bezos' ex. She gave away something like $8 billion last year. And pretty unprecedented, this kind of philanthropy, because she gave it out sort of unrestricted, and she gave a lot of it to causes that are trying to level the economic playing field. You don't see a lot of that in big philanthropy. People are usually like, oh, I'm building this institute, or I'm building, I want this building with my name on it at Stanford, or whatever. These big gestures, but they're not gestures that create equity in the society. So Mackenzie Scott was doing, a good kind of philanthropy, but her holdings in the past year have skyrocketed so much more than she was able to spend in that year. If you have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars and you want to be charitable, you don't just give it all to United Way. When you have that kind of money, it's actually a big responsibility on spending it properly, and it'll take all your time. And if you have other things you're doing with your life, you might not want to take that time. It could be a real chore. And so some people leave money in a foundation when they die. They create an estate, a foundation with their estate, and then they leave it to their kids or someone else. And then the kids are like, I don't want to deal with this. I have my own life. I don't spend all my time being a philanthropist. I mean, that's sort of a choice that some people make. Some people like it, but I have a character in my book who is an author, and she's inheriting this insane amount of money. And she says, I just want to write my books. I mean, that's what she does. That's her job. She loves writing her books. And now she's got to think about, how do I give away this money?
You're not asking people to have a sense of sympathy, the reader, or in this case, the listener, for folks in this situation. But at the same time, you do a great job to talk about they do have actual real problems, including social problems and things like suicide for teenagers of super wealthy families. And so as we talk about this, I know you're not asking for people to have a sense of sympathy, but it's really, I think, important and fascinating for a lot of reasons to learn about how they're living. And the other issue here that you touch on, of course, is you mentioned, charitable giving and philanthropy. And a lot of people have pointed this out, especially recently, is that these super wealthy people are deciding where they want to give their money away. And, people can say, oh, they're such good people. They're such generous people. When in effect, a lot of economists will talk about, well, the best way that money should be distributed is through taxes so that individuals don't decide where they want to give money. This pediatric cancer foundation or, veterans organization or whatever. And that's a broken system, and it's operating exactly the way it was made to operate. But that doesn't work to solve problems, to have wealthy people give away their personal, to their personal whatever causes that they care about, even if they're good causes, right? Explain that a little bit to me.
They're good causes, but they're very personalized, and we're also subsidized. When you create a foundation, you put money in it, you're taking a big tax deduction. So we are subsidizing their giving, like 20, 25, 30%.
We're subsidizing their foundations. That's what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the foundations can be big kind of money laundering operations in a way, because you can hire your own family members, pay them a good salary. You can take your board members on junkets to Ibiza or whatever. And that all comes out of the overhead, which is the law only requires foundations to pay out 5% of their endowment each year. And so all the expenses are included in that. So you can really give away very little and, live the high life for your employees. And, Anyway, that's going down a different rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, big philanthropy is incredibly undemocratic.
Right.
I write in the book, which I learned this from Rob Reich, who's a Stanford professor. He wrote a book called Just Giving about specifically about philanthropy.
The former Treasury Secretary, Robert Reich?
No, not that Rob Reich. This is Rob Reich.
I was like, are you such good friends with him? You just call him Rob?
Yeah, no, this is a political scientist.
Got it. I'll look into his work.
Stanford. Yeah, no, it's called Just Giving.
Got it.
It's an interesting book, yeah, because he points out a lot of these things. And also we have Anand Giridharadas from the New York Times, formerly from the New York Times, who wrote Winners Take All. So there's been a lot of awareness about the broken system of philanthropy. So one of the characters in my book is actually Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, who has kind of taken a very liberal. He is arguing basically that big philanthropy should be making itself less necessary by investing in things that do change the landscape of economic inequality, as opposed to just slapping Band-Aids on things.
Well, he happens to be, I heard a profile of him, I'm pretty sure we're talking about, he's a black guy, gay, grew up really poor, and is running one of the most, affluent foundations in the world, right? So, I mean, it's like he's bringing his perspective. Usually people that had that life experience don't end up usually running foundations like that. I think it's interesting.
That's absolutely right, yeah. He was very lucky, and he knows he was lucky.
Right, yeah.
He's super smart. He's super good with people. He managed to, work his way up. He tells me in the book how, when he was in college, he went to the University of Texas, and he managed to get into this exclusive kind of club called the Friars Society. It was like a Friars Society, I think, which has, alumni who are Congress people and governors and CEOs and all this. And he became the lead guy in this group as a student. He was called the Abbot. And so, of course, you go to these functions. There was one function at the governor's mansion, and he's the only black guy in the room, except for the servers, right? And so there are all these fancy people walking around, and he goes up to introduce himself. And before he says, "Hi, I'm Darren Walker. I'm the Abbot." He started to say, "I'm the Abbot," and the lady's like, "I'd like a gin and tonic." And he says this has happened to him many times. He says, you're in these rooms, and why would you be there if you're black other than, being one of the servers or the caterers or whatever?
I have a joke in my stand-up comedy act that just reminded me of when I was at an all-black wedding, and I was in the groom's party, the only white person there, and a black guy came up and ordered from me. It was like, I said, it's my one example of kind of reverse...
fair play.
I was like, I'm in the groom's party. He's like, yes, one Heineken. I'm like, I don't work here yet. Coming up, sir. That's a really...
I would have just gotten him the Heineken.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a really... There's so many very surprising and, if you want to look at it, outrageous anecdotes and experiences in your book, Jackpot, which is so good for so many reasons. But who did you try to look at? Like, what were the type of characters? What was the criteria for people who you want to look at their lives and the advantages and access and including problems that they had?
Well, I wanted to look at a variety of people because it was interesting to me, does it matter your wealth experience, how you got your money? So I wanted to look at inheritors. I wanted to look at more by luck, and then people who kind of slowly built up a company and sold it to get a sense of it. And I also wanted to talk to children of wealthy people, people who had grown up in rich families versus poor families. I wanted to I talked to a lot of people who service the wealthy in various ways, from a super high-end realtor to a woman who trains billionaires nannies in, counter surveillance and physical combat. There was a guy who builds, luxury safe rooms for hedge funders. Oh, so here's a great story.
Yeah, tell me what you learned from this guy.
Well, he actually, I think I had to cut this from the book, but he was over in Iraq, because he got his start building pawn shops or check cashing places in the ghetto. And because his cousin was part of a company that was building a bunch of these places, he said, "Come over here," because he's from Ireland. "Come on over here. We got a job for you. You can build these things." So these were basically primitive safe rooms. They were like these steel boxes where all the tellers sit. And from there, he started doing mainstream banks. He would do the things that the facades in front of the tellers. And then, but they'd be like super nice, but they're actually bulletproof and so forth. And then he got hired to start doing like safe rooms in government consulates, U.S. consulates overseas. He was brought over to Iraq to arm convoys. So he's over in Iraq and he's staying outside of the green zone with some people. He's in some building and they're sleeping, with guns under their pillows because they're paranoid because there's all kinds of sectarian violence going on. And, he said, while I was there, I realized something about the design of safe rooms. He said, because anyone who comes in here at 4 a.m. to kill us is going to be wide awake. They're going to be wired, mission oriented. They know what they're doing. And, we'll just be waking up and maybe we drank too much the night before and we've got this gun and we're going to be fumbling around with it because we're not used to it. And he said, what I realized is like, you have to make the rooms, a safe room has to be a room that you use every day. You don't want the special designated room because you won't know how to deal with it in an emergency. So he started arming people's bedrooms, their master bedrooms, their underground theaters, their wine cellars. One guy said, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out drunk. This guy had like millions of dollars worth of wine in there. So, you can sit there and drink Chateau Lafite at the end of the world.
That sounds...
And he said some of these guys build safe rooms inside safe rooms. So he's like, so there'll be a walk-in closet that's like, barricaded somehow. And it's, when I say walk-in closet, I'm talking 20 feet by 20 feet, not your tiny little, 2-bedroom apartment closet. So these are big, big closets. And then within the closet, there would be another room with a little slot in the door so you could shoot out of it. So, here's the story I was getting to. A lot of these guys are hedge funders. They were the hedge funders. A lot of them were around for 9/11. And so, they had this fear of terrorism. They had this fear of something bad could happen. And they're incredibly wealthy people, incredibly wealthy. And so a lot of them had their offices armored first. And then they would hire him to do their houses. And a lot of them live in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is this, wealth haven outside of New York City. And so this one guy wanted him to build a machine gun nest in the attic area of his house, and so that he could get people coming up the driveway. And the safe room guy, he was not actually working directly with the billionaire in this case because sometimes he never even meets him. He just works with their security guys.
Right.
But this is what the guy wanted. And he told the security consultant, he's like, that's mad. You can't do that. Like, you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life, first of all. And, you can't just shoot at people. And so somebody talked the guy off the cliff. So he never did build that thing. But just
he wanted a gun turret to pick people off. And it's funny because, you describe that and then you think about that image from... what was it last summer with those two wealthy people in St. Louis standing outside?
Oh, yeah.
With their guns.
And the McCloskeys.
Oh, well done. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that you read about in Jackpot in terms of what people's fantasies are about the wealth that they would like to have, that they do have, or the fantasies about, what kind of danger they're going to be in as a result of it. But you also talk about how Americans buy into this myth and desire... and that it's somehow something that we can all achieve in America, this meritocracy, which, again, there's tons of data to prove that that's true of several other countries before you get to America. But when we have this kind of wealth gap, economic inequality that's so extreme, and I think like 40% of billionaires, whatever the statistics about the pandemic, that the wealthy people got so much wealthier and poor people got so much more impoverished. Where is the disconnect, do you think, in people's minds as to what is reality in this country and what is the truth about how you make it in America?
I've got to feel like people are becoming a little bit more cynical about the American dream and B, the mobility myth. But we still think, still somewhere it's in our culture. It's really a part of our culture. Yeah. We think we are optimistic about the idea that anyone can get ahead and anyone can get a lucky break and be that guy, as I said, like in the mansion on the hill. And this actually comes out of a novel that was written like 150 years ago by Horatio Alger called Ragged Dick. And this was like a serialized novel about this shoeshine boy. It
was also my nickname in 8th grade, but I don't want to go into that.
Ragged Dick.
No need for anybody to learn about that, but go ahead. What was it about?
You just gave it away. So with grit and hard work, this guy works his way up from the poor shoeshine boy to like upper middle class respectability. And this was a massive bestseller. By today's standards, this is like sold ridiculous numbers of books. People were following it, and then came out as a whole novel the next year, and it was more of a bestseller. People loved this story, and you hear the name Horatio Alger all the time. This has become kind of a part of our culture, as was The American Dream, which comes from another book. And the thing is, it's just not true. There are a million things that hold us down, and the chance that you are going from the bottom 20% to the top 1% are very, very slight. And especially if you're talking about getting really rich. I mean, yeah, sure, a few people win the lottery, but what are the chances of that? So to win Powerball, okay, it's one in 292 million. And I actually calculated this. You basically could fill an Olympic swimming pool halfway full of like yellow jelly beans and throw an orange one in there and mix it all up, and then jump in there with a blindfold. And if you could pick out that orange jelly bean, that's like the equivalent. It's just not going to happen.
Well, it's an experiment. Yet you could pass that off at a carnival and have people try it. And make a lot of money.
At least you get a couple of jelly beans.
Exactly. Dive in the pool. If you find the orange jelly bean, you will win $1 million. Enjoy.
Or you get five yellow jelly beans.
Or you drown in jelly beans, which is, if we want to continue with this metaphor, the more likely reality for trying to pursue some kind of get-rich-quick scheme, ending up poor the rest of your life.
The ball crawl is really disgusting. I'm sure the jelly bean crawl would be.
Oh, God. So
here's something good that'll come out of COVID. No more ball crawl.
Well,
you do put your toddler in a ball crawl now?
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of things that are going to change. I was trying to think of some other ones, but yeah, for sure. I mean, are you even going to let your kids play with other kids in person?
I do want to mention. You mentioned just how billionaires have gotten richer.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you the number.
Yeah, go ahead.
Biden actually talked about this in his speech, but he undercut it. Since like March of 2020 till now, the top like 660 billionaires, their wealth has increased 55%, $1.6 trillion richer during the pandemic. And then they say, oh yeah, we've given a lot more to charity during the pandemic. We've opened our wallets to give 100 million here, 100 million there. Yeah, that's great, but you're richer than you ever were before. I mean, your wealth has just skyrocketed, and you're only giving a fraction of that back to the people who are really struggling. So, well, you also talk a lot
in the book about how they get away with it. I mean, are you familiar with David K. Johnston's books, Free Lunch and Perfectly Legal? I think that was my introduction into some of the tax policies and the way they are set up, but. It's all designed, it's easy to fall into some of these conspiracy theories, not the really wacky ones, but that the wealthy folks have it rigged. But it's no secret. It's how policy is made in the United States of America, and wealthy folks especially understand that tax policy is the way. Explain some of what you learned as to what they pay in taxes on their wealth, on their income, versus what the vast majority of Americans pay. This is always the most convincing argument to me, even to kind of right-wing fiscal conservatives. I'm like, if you lay pipe for a living, if you work with your hands for a living, you pay more as a percentage of your actual manual labor than super wealthy people do on the money they make while they're sleeping.
That's right. And it's interesting because the Republican Party always want to be the party of the working class. It's like, give me a break, right?
They don't even know any hardly. Well, they do a lot. We shouldn't say that because a lot of Trump voters, especially, are not a lot of folks are poor, and yet they vote for people who support policies that they do not benefit. Sorry to jump in. What were you going to say?
Well, there's a big propaganda mouthpiece here working. So, one of the big things, obviously, is capital gains tax, which is the tax you get from you sell a stock. Your profits are capital gain. You get taxed on that. So you get taxed a maximum of 20%. As if you're a high earner, you pay 20%. If you're a middle, medium earner, you pay 15%. If you work hard and get a paycheck, it ranges depending on how wealthy you are, but it maxes out at 37%. So it's 20% versus 37, a 17% difference in how much you're taxed. Now, is that fair? I mean, the argument has been the supply side nonsense. I think I just gave myself away.
You're just agreeing with George H.W. Bush in 1980.
Well, so the supply siders said, well, you give tax cuts to the rich. You encourage, you charge a lower tax on investment gains. Well, you're encouraging investment, and you're encouraging the job creators to create jobs that'll help the economy rise and help everybody. This is an old argument, and it's also a wrong one. The tax cuts for the wealthy have been found by researchers time and time again to do nothing to grow the economy. What they do is they make rich people richer.
Yeah.
Because think about it. If I make you pay more on your profits from a big pot of money you just have sitting around to invest, if I make you pay more on those profits, what are you going to do? You're going to not invest the money? You're still going to invest the money. You're still going to create businesses. You're still going to, buy stocks and private equity or whatever you do with your money. That money is still going to be put to use. And it's a nonsensical argument that it won't. So, why does the guy who, doing hard labor all day not going to pay less than the guy who's just sitting on a fat wad of money, like you said, and earning money while he sleeps? Yeah. I mean, that is why we have such a big divergence. So the other aspect is the estate tax, which, as one of Trump's former advisors, what's the name, Cohn? I'm forgetting his first name. He said, only morons pay the estate tax. And all the wealth advisors going, yeah, only morons pay. Well, the morons are rich people with a civic conscience.
You're talking about Gary Cohn, I think. But
Gary Cohn, yes.
But I mean, yeah, but the estate tax is only affects people that have more than $5 million or something, right? I mean,
more than 5 million, more than, it's okay. Right now, the exemption, basically, so the lifetime amount you're allowed to give to your children tax-free, or give to anyone, but usually your children, is $11.7 million for an individual, $23.4 million for a couple. So if my wife and I had $30 million, we can give $23.4 million to our children right now or after we die. And we don't pay a penny of tax on that.
Well, that's because my daddy already paid taxes on it.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my argument to that. When you hire a plumber, you pay that guy, right? He has to pay taxes. That's income. Okay. So your children are getting this massive bequest. That's income too. But they're not doing anything for it. They're doing nothing. There's no labor involved.
I had to put up with my daddy the whole.
Yeah, but that's not, the tax code's a moral document.
Yes.
And we are allowing, this is policy. Yep. It's not just like you are automatically entitled to this money. We decide as a collective, we decide, okay, well, first of all, we're going to let you make $1 billion because we're giving you this huge tax break on your capital gains. And then you want to take that money. You say, oh, I already got taxed on that money. I'm just going to give it all to my kids tax-free. Well, come on, please. The government already let you earn more money than you should have earned. And then now it can't tax you when you're just going to hand it to your child and perpetuate intergenerational wealth inequality. It's like, come on. It's like we have a role to play. The people, I'm no communist, but it's like a society gets to make some rules.
It's so dumb. By the way, to me, any conversation or argument or debate about economics is generally stupid because people reference whatever they know, whatever little we know, including me, and then they water it down to some kind of, what are you, a blank in terms of what kind of economic system you support? And my argument is, I don't know what I am. I'm definitely not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I don't know that whatever I fit into has a name for it. I just know that what we have now is not working at all. And furthermore, there's nothing like this in past that's ever been tried in any other country because of the rise of technology, the rise of AI, and the fact that everything is changing so rapidly. So let's have a debate and argument about the future economy, but let's not base it too much on the past economic systems that have ever been tried in any other country, because most of them are failing miserably, including ours, which is destroying both our society and our planet. Rant over. Dominic, out.
Okay. I was going to say that, perfect equality is not really the goal here.
Right.
Some level of inequality. I mean, if you believe that some form of capitalism is desirable, it probably is, but not unfettered the way we let it become unfettered. Inequality is inevitable, and some of that's desirable because, are you going to pay the guy who sweeps the street outside? Should he get the same as the person who builds rocket ships? No, probably not. Right. But, how much does the guy who builds rocket ships, how much more do you pay him than the guy who sweeps the street? It's the level of inequality. And there was an interesting experiment I talk about in my book. This was actually back in 2011. A guy named Michael Norton and something Ariely, they did an experiment where they took 5,500 Americans. And in part of the experiment, they showed them these pie charts of wealth distributions of different societies. And they would show them pairs of pie charts. And they'd say, which one of these societies would you like to live in if you were just going to be placed at random within that wealth distribution? And one was perfect equality. Each 20% got 20% of the wealth. One was Sweden, but they didn't tell you that, which was more, moderate. And then the third one is the United States. When people looked at Sweden versus perfect equality, more of them chose Sweden. But when they looked at Sweden versus the United States, more than 90% of them chose Sweden. And this is Americans, and this is Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah,
they chose Sweden because when you actually look at the wealth distribution of the United States, it's crazy. It's far worse than you ever imagined. I mean, collectively, the least wealthy 40% of Americans own nothing, zero.
And not only do they not own or have any assets like homes or cars, we always talk about stock and investments. So many investments either. The vast majority of people don't have money in the stock market. You're talking about in your book, Jackpot, the chapter, The Snowball Grows. Dan Ariely, who's a professor of psychology and behavioral economics, and you mentioned Michael Norton. Dan is at Duke and Michael Norton's at Harvard Business. And this is a really interesting chapter in the book which explains this psychological experiment, the societal experiment. And I think that's another great thing about your book is looking at this actual social science, because so much of these kind of questions can be asked in a hypothetical way. What would you want? What kind of society would you like to live in, which is fair and so on? And people don't choose what we have right now is the way I'm going to summarize all of this great research. But you also talk...
This is why Biden's policies right now, his proposals to which are kind of supposed to level some of this problem, they're actually very popular. They're popular among Republicans too. I mean, among many Republicans, surprising number of them. So it's just when you get to the Senate, no, sorry.
Well, right, but a lot of these, but as you're saying in this chapter in the book, a lot of these policies are very popular when they are explained not by Sean Hannity or not by some flamethrower in the media or in politics that's there to get ratings and divide us. If you explain to people the vast majority, the death tax, the estate tax is only on these many. This is not going to affect you. People would support it because you're investing back into their community and so on. But you talk about job creators. They talk about job creators all the time. And you do have a very fascinating, part of your book where you describe this alternate universe of wealth and these kind of cottage industries that technically, I guess they are job creators, but there's only just so many jobs in yacht building and maintenance. Or tell us some of the things, the jobs at beachside villas. I mean, you can't support an economy and these ultra rich, concierge doctors, but explain some of what you learned here.
Well, I mean, we could pick any one of those,
sure.
right? The concierge docs, it's actually a growing practice. So this is like your primary care instead of going to Kaiser or whomever, your HMO. You did have a primary doctor. So you have a doctor, you get their cell phone number, you have these very exclusive appointments where you don't see anyone else, no other patients. You go in there and they're like, here's cappuccino and fresh fruit and, oh, Mr. Mechanic, how are your children? Oh, well, how's your business doing? How's your book doing? It's this very kind of a pampered service, but but then you're paying extra for this. Anywhere from there's a few $1,000s a head per family member to up to like $40,000 per year. And then on the side, you have to have health insurance too. And so I was talking to this guy in the book who, he oversees a network of 100 concierge doctors practices. And, he's extolling, he's like, this is the future of medicine. And I was like, okay, I agree with you that everyone should be treated this way because it's wonderful. But the fact is, there's still like a big chunk of Americans who don't even have health insurance. There's going to be a shortage of primary care doctors. It's been predicted. It's great if you can afford it, but no, it's actually not great. It's not a desirable thing. No, I see why people want it if they can afford it.
The other thing I think I wanted to ask you about, sir, because it's crazy about the idea of just access. When you're an ultra wealthy person, you have access to anybody or anyone you want. I've experienced, some of this just being in the career that I'm into is that I can reach out to certain people and ask them the questions. And I love that. So I do love that idea of access, but we're not talking about the fact that I can, text, I don't know, I don't want to drop names and get their take on the thing. Well, I've one piece of access that's been really helped me out during the last year is access to epidemiologists and virologists and texting them questions about anything I want. I like that kind of access, but that's not what we're talking about.
Journalistic access. I mean, there's something intoxicating about it. I mean, sure. I've met people doing this book that it's like, wow, it's sort of cool to know some of these people. They're really interesting people. But they, folks that I talked to and have come into wealth said to me, it's crazy. Like I had all this money. This one guy's like, I'm into conservation causes. And so I started giving money to these big conservation groups. And so, I get to go eat dinner with the founder and hang out with them. Nick Hanauer, who is the guy who was a seed investor in Amazon, he put up $45,000, got 1% of Amazon. Just back in the day, like when it was just starting up. And so, now he's incredibly wealthy, flies around a private jet. And interestingly, he's become an anti-inequality crusader. The introduction actually starts with him.
Yep. Well, I mean, I think what Nick is doing, this is what I wanted to ask you along those lines, though, what Nick is doing versus, or even what George Soros is doing, like versus like what the Koch brothers, the billionaires shouldn't exist. But if they do exist, their main role should be to make themselves extinct by lobbying for tax policies that there aren't loopholes around, that you have to pay actual effective rates so that there can't be any more billionaires. I mean, and the difference between kind of progressive billionaires and conservative billionaires, now I'm being really partisan or opinionated, but I think this is mostly true, is that progressives are oftentimes advocating for policies that don't necessarily benefit them individually, but benefit the collective, the community. Whereas, the Koch brothers, while they are investing in their own political ideology, their libertarianism, they're investing in things that destroy the planet and labor and want to keep things the way that they are. How am I doing, and where would you poke holes in that theory?
Well, I think that the wealthy Democrats, the wealthy progressives, are, they're to some degree their heart's in the right place, but they're still ultra wealthy people, and they are still, living this lifestyle with massive carbon footprint, and for one thing, and they don't want to give that up. They are advocating to become maybe less relevant, but they still want to be relevant. They enjoy the power that they have, and they do have the power. It's like if you look at okay, if you look at the biggest political donors in America, like the 50 biggest political, because I did on Open Secrets, you can look at them all. There's a list. And roughly, almost half are Democrats and half are Republicans. And the interesting thing is these rich business people used to give to both parties. Now they don't at all. It's all one party, all the other. Shows us how bad things have gotten. It's one thing if you're a billionaire and you give to all the politicians because you want to influence policy, understandable, even though not desirable. But now it's like, I'm only giving to the conservative Republicans, or I'm only giving to liberal Democrats. We are so polarized that even wealth has become this polarized. It's a little bit nutty. No, I remember what I was going to say before about Nick Hanauer. It was about access. Right. He said to, we were talking about access, and he said to me, one of the most distorting things about wealth is it just gives you this undeserved power to pick up the phone and talk to anybody and have anyone call you back. You'll be a senator, a university president. You get a personal call from that person. And, he told me he got into this whole thing of oh, well, I'm not going to try and just make my pile of money bigger. I'd rather do something more interesting. And so one of the things he wanted to do is he called it, just pursue stuff that interested him in part of his time, new intellectual ideas and things like that. Mm-hmm. So he got into astronomy. And so, you or I might have to read books about astronomy, watch movies about astronomy. Well, he can call up the leading researchers in the country and say, hey, can I come over there? Will you show me your what you do? And so he gets to hang out with these guys. Yeah. And of course, he's like, yeah, well, okay, sure, I'll fund your observatory, So you're buying access. And of course, this can really backfire when the person buying access is Jeffrey Epstein, for instance, who did a lot of this. He went to Harvard. He was, Harvard. He went to all these researchers and sort of cultivated these relationships. And now we see actually Bill Gates getting in trouble for his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, I'm actually reading about that one. I'm actually interested in that story because it's, the intersection between powerful men especially, and the way they use that power and access for sex, regardless of who they are, even, how powerful they are. Their reputation is sterling, but yet they're still secretly doing super shady things. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if Bill Gates said anything or not, but there's whether
right. We think we think about Bill Gates and we think, oh, look at all this great stuff he's done. Yeah. This is a bit shocking. We don't know what's coming or what we're going to find out, but just sort of his dalliance with Epstein is really troubling. It's why would a guy like Bill Gates, and maybe we don't know Bill Gates as well as we think we do. So
you'd have to be we both know that you would have to be an absolute fool of a man to not know that another man is doing this kind of stuff. I mean, you can't hide that kind of stuff. And, it's just.
Well, he did know because it already happened.
And you're absolutely right about Bill Gates. Bill Gates chose to spend time with this guy after he knew what he was doing. Right. And that never, ever should have happened. Let me just ask you about this idea that what wealth does to kind of change people, and if there are personality traits or characteristics that, what is the relationship between people's personality, their character, and their wealth? What did you find? Does it make them better people, worse people? I'm sure there are no rules, but you did find certain things that were common.
Well, here's something you hear quite a bit. And so, I think people like to say this too. 3 or 4 people said this to me. They said wealth kind of amplifies your personality. If you're a jerk, it's going to make you a bigger jerk. If you're a great person, it gives you the means to be a greater person. But then I've had other people say, yeah, wealth absolutely changes you. I mean, Nick Hanauer thought that. This guy, Richard Watts, who's sort of a consigliere to billionaire families and so forth, he said the same. He's like, yeah. I mean, I guess the question is how much wealth changes you, right? I mean, what degree of wealth changes you? And I feel like when it gets to the point where money is a constant concern, is constantly on your mind. You're always thinking about it. That can definitely mess with your world a lot. The interesting thing is, like, one of the reasons this book was difficult is it's hard to get really wealthy people to talk to you,
right?
Because, like we talked about that earlier, and they don't participate in research for the most part. Right. Occasionally they might do a survey or something, but as this guy Paul Piff, a psychology researcher who studies sort of the wealth gradient and sort of behavior, he says, you don't get, billionaires don't sign up for $10 psychology studies, right? Often they have to get groups of students and they look at the students' family incomes. So it's a proxy. And so they look at sort of this gradient of wealth from, it's probably sometimes the poor, like folks who are poor, but it's usually that's a minority because they don't tend to participate either, right? It's usually like lower middle class up to, lower rich. And so the super wealthy aren't really, we don't have a lot of data on them. So it's hard to say. And it's also, none of it is like before and after data. Nobody's ever said, we're going to look at this big group of people and learn all these things about it, and then go back after they make $100 million and,
that would be an impossible research project to conduct.
Maybe not, because they've done some big longitudinal studies of like large groups of people over time. There was an interesting Harvard study where actually they went through generations of people, and they didn't really look specifically at wealth, but they were looking at kind of what makes people happy. And they found that the people who, seriously, it's still going on. It's happened from like almost a century worth of following families and really tracking them down and asking them these comprehensive questions. And, it's not the pursuit of wealth that makes people satisfied with their lives. It's all about community and forging connections with others, the things that we would expect, right? That your mom would tell you. And yet our culture is so built around the idea of wealth accumulation and striking it rich, and it always has been. And so there's this constant tension in our society between doing what your mom says, money won't buy you happiness, but it's like, oh, I don't really believe that. If I just had, if I just made $20,000 more, I could afford to have more space or, whatever. And it's true that when you have like very little money, it can make you miserable.
No doubt about it. There's no doubt about that. When you have to worry about how you're going to feed your kids and pay your bills and whether or not you're going to have a roof over your house, that's all you can think about. But when you get, past a certain point, there's a lot of research on that. And
then when you get to the very high end, it's also all you can think about, except you have everything you want.
Right.
But you have to obsess about your money. And also it's like, where's my meaning? Let's say you're a big investor. You're making all your money from this big pot of money you already have. It's like, well, where's your friggin' meaning in life? You're just making money off your money. Like, where's your self-worth? There's a lot there there's a lot of psychology you can dissect.
I have one experience to share with you because you wrote about this, and I'll wrap it up because you wrote about this. But, you think about, we touched on it just for a second, children of, super wealthy families growing up in tremendous wealth. When I was 20 or 21 in New York City, when I was starting out as a comedian, I got a job coaching lacrosse and soccer at the Trinity School, which is pretty much one of the top private schools in the richest, place in the world, Manhattan. And so I got to know these kids really well. I was really young and they loved me. And I quickly learned that their main social problem was that they rarely saw their parents. They were raised, most of them, by nannies, and they really didn't see their parents. And I mean, we're talking about the ultra wealthy, but even, any hardworking person, to make good money, generally, you got to work a lot of hours. And when you work a lot, you can't be with your family, which goes back to my core values. And I interviewed so many wealthy people and always ask them this question, or I should say parents, and they always talk about wealth equals time with your family. And maybe some people don't want that, but certainly that was my definition of it. And these kids were all kinds of screwed up because they never saw their parents and they thought their parents didn't like them. And why did they have them? And all these questions that, you ask as an adolescent. I'll never forget when they were getting on the bus to go to practice. And I asked them, each one of them, where they were going to take vacation during that upcoming spring break, and they just got progressively more exotic locations. Like, well, we have a place, a condo that we're going to in Florida. We're going to our island. We are going to the space station on our rocket ship. You know, it just got more and more wealthy. I was like, who are these? I did not grow up around anybody like this. I didn't understand it. But the truth was, these kids, a lot of them were all medicated. They struggled like crazy because they didn't even see their parents. And you have the statistic about suicide with wealthy kids. Talk to me a little bit about the social problems that the children of the wealthy struggle with.
You know, this is sort of across, you know, I talked to this formerly Yale psychologist who was starting her career and doing work on these kids in like poor urban kids. And she was studying resilience among the poor urban kids. And she wanted to, she observed that kids who acted out in class and were kind of more respected by the other kids. And she said, is this like, you know, a thing of like, is it a cultural thing? Is it a thing? Is it money, or is it, you know, is it just a teenage thing? And so her research assistant said, hey, I come from this like fancy school in Westchester County where you should take some kids from my high school and as a comparison group. So she started studying the poor kids and the rich kids. And it turns out the rich kids, she asked a lot of questions, and she learned the rich kids were actually at as higher risk for like antisocial behavior, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all this stuff. And she was like, holy crap. Because like the conventional wisdom in psychology at that time was, no, it's like these things are associated with poverty, not wealth. So she went on to kind of make a career studying this stuff. And across the board, she finds it's like the richest kids and the very poorest kids are pretty much at equal risk for these bad behaviors and for falling into, you know, substance abuse problems and things like that. And, you know, the wealthy communities, they try to sort of hide it. Wealthy families don't want to like tell you about this stuff,
right?
But it happens, you know, and the kids of the wealthy families also were more likely to say they self-medicate. Like you said, they were medicated, because they're under incredible pressure to achieve in these families. It's like, no, you got to get to the socioeconomic level that your parents did. Look at your parents. Like, you got to do better. You got to do as well, you know. So you know, it's hard to live up to that. And these kids were depressed. They're anxious. They're like taking 10 AP classes and freaking out. And you know, that begets a lot of like all these things you talked about. You know, the suicide, the drugs, and obviously it's easy to get good drugs at private schools because.
Well, I was selling them to the kids.
Exactly.
I kid.
That's how you made it.
Yeah, it was helpful just to get by. So much more I want to talk with you about, but I just, you know, the irony would be that if writing Jackpot made you super wealthy, that's what I hope the case is. I hope everybody goes and buys this book because it's such a good read. It's so interesting, and there's policy prescriptions and so much more. When I get done with it, I'd love to continue this conversation. It's really unique and great, and keep up the great work at Mother Jones, which I'm a subscriber to. I really appreciate you joining me, Michael. Thank you so much, and congrats on Jackpot.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.
All right, there he goes, Michael Mechanic, michaelmechanic.com, the book Jackpot. Go buy it right now and follow him on Twitter. Tell him you heard him on the Stand Up with Pete Dominic, a daily program, at Michael Mechanic on Twitter. That's always appreciated, as is your subscription to the show. If you haven't subscribed, now would be a great time. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. Can't thank you enough for all of your support and another great week in the books. Go back and listen to anything that you missed, because together we learn a lot, we laugh a lot, get enlightened on this journey that we are calling life, I guess, and I'm very happy to have you on it along with me. All right, that's it. I love you. I hope you have a great weekend. If you're listening on Friday, I'm looking forward to going for a walk with two longtime listeners who I love to race, and Megan, both meeting up with both them on Sunday, and that's going to be awesome. I've met so many of you over the past year especially, and it's it's always awesome, always magical and great, and I love it. So hopefully I get to meet you sometime, but thank you very much for listening. And now is the time when I stop talking and throw it over to Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, the legend in our midst, longtime supporter. Here he is, John Carroll with Stand Up. Take it away, Johnny.